want people to leave feeling better than when they arrived? How do you welcome somebody? How do you engage them? I'm so lucky because the feeling I have when I act a certain way in the restaurant is genuine.
Welcome to Grey Matter. I'm Declan Kelly, founder, chairman, and CEO of Consello. I've spent the last 30 plus years advising the CEOs who are leading the world's top companies. If there's one thing I've learned in that time, the best leaders think differently. That wiring, that grey matter, separates the truly exceptional leaders from everyone else. Understanding it is what allows us at Consello to help the best in the world be even better. This podcast exists because the most accomplished leaders agreed to sit down and talk about something they rarely discuss publicly: how their minds actually work. The River Cafe, by any measure, is one of the most beloved restaurants in the world. But ask people what they remember, and they don't only speak about the exceptional food. They talk about how the restaurant made them feel, like their presence actually mattered. For almost 40 years, Ruthie Rogers has been the heart behind that experience. She has lived that way her entire life, shaped by a childhood where hospitality was simply how you lived, and curiosity about people was how you moved through the world. In the process, she has become deeply cherished, equally beloved by the staff who have worked alongside her for decades, and the most celebrated figures in the world who all count the River Cafe among their favorite places to be. And she continues to teach us that caring, done consistently and without reservation, is its own form of greatness. This is Grey Matter. Ruthie Rogers, welcome to Grey Matter.
I am so happy to be here.
Thank you for welcoming us into your beautiful home here in London, the River Cafe, on the banks of the River Thames. It's such a thrill to be here.
Well, it's beautiful. This location is so special to us. And the room that we're in is our private dining room that we have. We have two. We have one that seats about 20, one that seats 50 here. And we named it Sylvia's after my mother. I still have to get used to when people say, "What's going on in Sylvia's tonight?"
Very few people in the world can achieve this accolade, but I know when people mention one word and they know who that person is, then you know you've kind of made it. So, you can have Bono, you can have Ronaldo, you can have Messi, you can have Madonna, you can have whatever you want. But when people mention Ruthie, there's only one Ruthie in the world. And I think it conjures up images of two things: glorious food and the River Cafe. Mariella Frostrup wrote a piece about you in The Guardian that really sums up sort of beautiful incongruity of how you run your business versus who you are as a person. And I'm going to read it to you because it says, "With her tousled hair, weathered tan, unadorned face, Ruthie is incongruous among the stiletto-heeled, designer-draped, and Botox clientele." What that meant was, how you move about the room and how you do what you do and the way you do it. You're extraordinarily low-key, low drama, and yet you deal with people every night for the last almost 40 years who are the opposite of that. And they come to decompress and be in a beautiful room and think about life in a very different way for those 2 or 3 hours when they're with you. Is it deliberate? Is it accidental? Is it a formula? Do you bring it every night? Is it what is it?
I don't think it's a formula. I think it is authentic. And I think it's an authenticity that probably has changed over the years, when you from being a teenager to being, out in the world, to having children, to living in other places, and to have a career that is so collaborative. I think probably like you, I work with people. People come to the restaurant, I'm not creating something and then in a room as a writer might do in a solitary way. It's all about the people. It's about understanding people who work with you, people who are coming. And in the restaurant, it's a long conversation. But, the short answer is that you want people to leave feeling better than when they arrived. How do you welcome somebody? How do you engage them? How do you respond to them? And I think I'm so lucky because the feeling I have when I act a certain way in the restaurant is genuine, and it's the way I would, be at home. It would be the way I'd be in a foreign country, which is to make, I'm so curious, why is this person here? Where did they come from? And, there's a lot more to say about that, but I do think it comes from really wanting to understand people.
To be interesting to other people, usually it means that you have to be interesting yourself. And I know you're very interested in art and literature and music and culture and theater and all the things that everybody knows about you. But when you are with people, I always observe that you are extremely interested in them
Mm.
and you go deep with them and
Yeah.
ask them questions about
Mm.
themselves, not because you're being performative, but because you're actually really interested. Were you always like that when you were growing up? Is this kind of, take me back to what you were like when you were in, upstate New York?
Yeah, well, I was the third child of two very engaged parents. I think my father was a doctor and my mother was a librarian, and they were, from a very early age, I felt a sense of responsibility to the community. And that, my father was on committees. I think in the medical world, he was someone who wanted to make medicine open to people who couldn't necessarily afford to be treated well. That my mother was a librarian who had children's readings, and she was very involved in those days, I think in the 50s of nuclear disarmament. So, and protest marches for engagement. And I think they were that we were all three of us brought up with a sense of responsibility to community. We were brought up with a sense of responsibility to family. They were both from immigrant families. My mother's family came from Russia, my father's from Hungary. They arrived in the Lower East Side in New York, Ellis Island. Had their names changed. The whole thing was keeping their identity, but also being in the United States, which was, as they called it then, a melting pot. I think when you have that, your family's very important to you. My father used to say that when he brought somebody home, my grandfather would say, "Are they family or are they strangers?" So they weren't friends. Now, 100 years later, I think of my friends as my family, but for them, that was a concept which you might relate to as an Irish
Yeah,
person
absolutely.
abroad. And so I think that my sister was more shy than I was when she had a different way of coping with it. And I think my brother also, he was a writer, he is a writer. And so a lot of his interest went into that. And I think as the youngest child, I was the one they really wanted to dote on and have a good life and took me everywhere with them and exposed me to different cultures, different things. So I think that I was brought up with liking people. People came more to our house than we went to other people's houses. Our doors were open. There was always another chair at the table.
When you were transplanted from that environment to London,
Mm,
you were 19.
yeah,
So that must have been an incredible culture shock in some ways, but perhaps not in others because you were such a social person and because you were so good with people. But how did that all come about?
nobody in my family had ever gone to boarding school, but I went for a summer to a camp in Colorado called the Rocky Mountain School. It was kind of very liberal atmosphere. It was on a ranch. It was the kind of when people were starting out trying to make schools a different concept from just education, education, education all day. So again, it was a kind of group. We had classes in the morning and then we cleaned out the stables or we climbed mountains or we learned to ski in the afternoon. We all helped cook the dinner. There was a kind of sense of community. And I loved that school. And then when I went to college, I went to another school that was like that, Bennington College in Vermont. And that probably was a mistake because I'd kind of had enough by then. And there was, 1967, 68. The world was not quite the same as now, but it was tumultuous. There was the Vietnam War. There were Students for Democratic Society. We'd lived through the assassination of Kennedy and Bobby Kennedy and Malcolm X. So it was a very intense political, social world going on that I wanted to be a part of. And so being in Vermont at a women's college probably wasn't the place. So I persuaded my parents to let me go to London just for the whole term. And that was probably 40, almost 60 years ago. And I think they've realized I'm not coming back.
I observe how people observe you and how they interact with you. And I see it at work in the restaurant. And when you look at life and you look at all the things that you've done in your life, those friends have really sort of carried you through your entire life. And it's still the same today.
It is, it is. But you have friends that you've known for years and years. You connect with somebody at a certain time in your life when you think, "Ah, I'm not going to meet anybody else. I have so many friends." And then you do. My friends, and there aren't a lot of them. They're friends, people I know, but they're true friends or close friends. And that connection is as deep as whether your blood is the same. I would do for them what they would do for me. And then when you lose someone, like I lost Richard, my husband, who was my best friend, you find another way of expressing and receiving love.
On that subject, I also think, many people who talk about the dignity that you show others in how you've dealt with grief, because you've had lots of challenging moments in your life that you've had to deal with.
Mm.
And yet you remain indefatigable. And I know we're all different when we're alone with our own thoughts.
Yeah.
And I know that when we have time alone, we show ourselves to ourselves, and it's a very
Yeah.
different thing.
Yeah.
We all have a game face.
Yeah.
But at the same time, there is an unspoken quiet dignity to how you demonstrate to others how you deal with things like that. How one deals with things like that.
Yeah.
I mean, you've had an extraordinary life, but you've also had to deal with these challenges.
Yeah. I think that each case, I've had a lot, but so have other people.
Right.
And I was asked the other day, I think I told you that, what is your advice? What advice do you have for grief? Because I grieve from, Rose, my partner, died in 2010, and my son totally unexpectedly died of a seizure in 2011, and then with Richard, a slow illness, and his loss, and very close friends. So I think I have no advice, about grief, except I try to say it will get better. That's the one thing I can tell you, that it will get better. But my way of dealing, well, certainly with Richard's loss, my son was different and Rose is different, for me, it's to be active. But as I always say, a friend of mine's brother just died in a car crash, and her mother, who had lived in a chateau in Burgundy, went to bed for 6 months. Am I to say, get out of bed and be active? No. Should somebody say to me, Ruthie, and I have had it said to me, stop and go to bed, and just cry. It's such a personal way of dealing with it, and I don't think there's a right or a wrong way, but it's a change, and I've been so lucky to have my family, my friends, and
That's when friendship really counts.
yeah, it does.
So if we look at the fact that you've got a Michelin-starred restaurant for such a very long time, rumor has it that you probably would have even had some more stars if you decided you were going to change certain things like the paper tablecloth, which I love that story. They offered you another star and you said, no, I'm good. I'll keep the paper tablecloth. That says everything about you, by the way.
Well, I think it is us, it is who we are, but I think, and I wouldn't do it for, as you say, for a star. But if things change, things real. But this started out as a way that the architects in the office, and we had a design company above us when we first moved into the River Cafe, didn't need to separate work from food, and so they could come in and draw. And we have a box of some of the drawings that we have that were made on these tablecloths. So food and family, food and work, food and continuity is kind of expressed. A child can come and draw on this. They can spill their orange juice, and you can clean it up. So there is something quite nice about it.
This concept of food as a refuge. I was thinking about you a couple of weeks ago because I was in America. I was interviewing Ken Burns, the documentary maker, at his house. And he has this fascinating concept of a still photograph, which looks like and presents as an inanimate object. He views it very much as an animate object. He views the actual photograph itself, a moment in time that's captured through the lens of a camera, as something that is a distinctive and distinct effort by a person to capture a moment in time. And this concept of food as a refuge, and it's almost spiritual for you, and conversation. And when I look at the interviews that you do with people, and even the conversations you have in the restaurant, people are all in on food because of what it does for them. It creates a love, a moment that they look forward to. Even I, as a 42-year vegetarian from Ireland, I still look forward to food all the time because it's something that you look forward to at the end of the day, which may seem obvious. But this concept of food as a refuge has really taken hold, I think, in recent years. And I think you've become one of the greatest purveyors of it, because over the course of time, people have fewer and fewer things to really hold on to because of what's going on in the world. Do you ever think about that?
I do see a lot of life through the lens of food. And I think that you see what happens to people, offering somebody to eat, to break bread, to have, we have a thing in our house, and I hope in the restaurant, was when you see someone, you offer them something, a coffee, a glass of water, whether they've come to fix your dishwasher or they're coming to work or they're coming just to have a nice time or see a house or meet from another country. If you stop what you're doing and offer somebody something, it makes you realize the focus is on them before they prepare your dishwasher or paint your bedroom, pick up your laundry. I think that's important. I think food for so many of us, safety. It's a place where we can, feel better. We can be fed and looked after or look after ourselves. And so I see it in the restaurant. I see people who come in, and I always say to the waiters, you never know what's happened to somebody before they come in to eat. They might be celebrating, or they might be, in despair because someone in their family is ill and they've just come from the hospital for a visit. Their grandson might have been fired from his job that day or might have, graduated from university that day. We always think people at the River Cafe are people of privilege, and they are. But there are also people who might have saved up for quite a long time for the meal they're about to have. So we really don't know. And sometimes we find out and sometimes we don't.
Pretty soon, a year and a bit from now, you'll be celebrating your 40th anniversary.
Yes.
Achieving that iconic status and that dreaded term institution, comedians often say being funny is a very serious business.
Yeah. Yeah.
And while it looks effortless,
No, no.
it's not. And you were talking last night about, the people that work with you and for you, and their love for what they do is so self-evident, and many of them have been with you for decades. And every day when you come in to start afresh and do it all over again, how much can you describe a little bit the sort of thought and effort that goes into making it special every single day?
Well, first of all, it's not just me.
Right.
I work with a team, and I can come in one day and really think that we need to focus on, you know, I can walk through the door and see that the wood oven needs to be painted, or, the floor that we've just put down isn't quite right, or a waiter doesn't seem to be focusing. He's got headphones in. We don't let people wear headphones in the morning while they're working, because we want to be able to
Engage.
engage. And
Yeah.
so other times it can be that I ate there the night before and how do I give the feedback? Other times I might feel that I haven't focused enough on what's going on in the office and I got a report about, an economic situation. And other times it's just, if I'm cooking that day and I know that at 12:30 the curtain is going up and people will be coming in, um, in a very practical way, and we write the menu. You're right. One thing that we've done since the beginning is rather like you do at home. We write the menu sort of on the basis of what's in the fridge. What has been ordered, what fish is coming in, and we also in the fridge are might be vegetables that we see need to be used. We might say, look around and say, oh, Harry's in today. He is so good at risotto. Let's do instead of one risotto, we'll do two. Or, um, this person maybe, had a hard time yesterday. So why don't we put them on pizzas? Because then all morning they can roll out dough and they don't have to, so you think of all that. But it's also the individuals who are working, what you feel hungry for. Sometimes I think, I had a bad night last night, so I think I know what I would like to eat today. So you then, it's so that's what sort of you start looking at that. But also there's a big professional deadline, which is that in almost a theatrical way, people will come in, and when they come in, the collaborative way the River Cafe works or any theater works, I guess, is that, the floor has to be clean, the chilies have to be chopped, the coffee beans have to be in the coffee grinder, the wines have to be settled in so everybody is working to this deadline of 12:30. And so while I'm doing the menu and checking that with another two chefs, the other chefs, well, everything comes in whole. So the fish comes in whole, the lamb comes in whole. So I'll say, yeah, we have lamb. We're not going to do lamb today, so don't prep the lamb. We're going to use up. We're going to use up or use the ribeye. So don't do that. And this today, I'd like the ribeye cut extra thick because it's cold out. So let's grill it for longer and have it, as something you want to eat. The waiters come in early, not to start folding the napkins and cleaning and laying the table, but they come in early to peel the potatoes. They
Wow.
chop the chilies. They do the parsley. They do the basil. So
Is that
look,
unusual in this restaurant?
it started since the first day we opened because Rose's kids really helped her with everything she did, and my children did too, maybe lesser degree, but she had a round table in the kitchen and everybody either was doing their homework or helping her. She even did it with guests who came to dinner. They thought they were coming for a dinner party, and they would be told to be
Given a job.
yeah, give it a job. And also, we did it for the reason that everybody would have a certain kind of engagement in the food. So that if you chop the chilies, you know they were going with the chili and parsley sauce for the monkfish. If you were, cleaning an anchovy, and the kitchen porters would come in, and there were not many dishes to wash, so they did things like the clams, the scallops, the mussels. They would be
Yeah,
engaged.
so this entirely collaborative maelstrom of organized behavior
Yeah.
that happens every day,
Yeah.
it's very unique. I mean, it doesn't happen like that in
Yeah, it
other
does it
kitchens.
because it certainly is easier, and you probably like make a lot more money if you didn't. The chefs who've actually worked in the River Cafe and start their own, I notice they do it their way. But there is a sense of, why we all love open kitchens. And I'm a total happy going to a restaurant. I never see a chef, but they're doing, and it's dramatic and it's quiet. But there's also, the open kitchen gives you access to seeing how somebody's, are they sharing their food? Are they going, it's not very good? And then it's a kind of way the waiters can have access to the kitchen, we have access to the floor. So it's a way that we've developed it.
It keeps it real. I mean, we're sitting doing this interview, and there's people cooking right behind us, and you can hear it, and it's organic and it's real. Is the reason why you've kept one space, and you've told me before that you've had opportunities to go and do this in many other countries, and of course, it's become this whole cultural phenomenon now. Your new book, and all the things that you're doing, TV shows, and everything that you're being interviewed for, because of all the amazing things that you've achieved. At the end of the day, it all revolves around a space
Mhm.
and a very special
Mm.
place that is almost religious, right? Not to take it too
I
far, but
that the
people are there, and it's amazing to watch what happens when people walk through that room.
Yeah.
It's completely egalitarian.
Yeah, I
It
would
just
say
it
that.
doesn't matter
Yeah.
where you're sitting.
Yeah.
There's no special table.
Yeah.
You can see everything that's going on,
Yeah.
and nobody feels like they're being treated differently to anybody else. Most restaurants are not like that.
Yeah.
I know some are, but most are not.
Yeah.
And so you've kind of created this place where you can observe the human condition in its fullest form. And you've done it for almost 40 years.
Yeah.
You must have an insane library of memories of things that really strike you about the human condition and people's behavior over time.
Yeah. I always say that, probably anybody listening will have heard it before, that people do very private things in a very public space. So the restaurant is a public space, and perhaps the River Cafe even more so, in the sense that there aren't alcoves where you could sit, or that it is when you're at your table, you're looking inwards. And I try to always give us table that is smaller than you would expect, so that you can lean in, that you
Intimate,
can
yeah.
crowd out. But I think that it does, there are times there have been people who've come here, as I say, after being exposed in the press, having their life story told, having had a really bad day. The Murdochs, after their, experience being in the House of Commons, and, the woman who attacked Rupert, and the public humiliation and the drama and everything, they came here for dinner. And I said to James, who's a friend, why? Wouldn't you want to just go home and be in your kitchen and just kind of recover? And he said, no, one, this is our home. This is where we want to be. So I think that it is really interesting that how people use a restaurant, or this restaurant, or some restaurant to go to. People get hired in restaurants. I don't know if you've ever hired or interviewed people. I understand the interviewing of somebody in a restaurant because I think it reveals a lot how someone is in a restaurant. Do they look the waiter in the eye? Do they say thank you? Do they share? Do they not share? Do they change their mind? Do they take a long time to deliberate? Not that there's a right or wrong. You don't have to look a waiter in the eye, and you don't have to share, and you don't have to do do anything that you don't want to do, but it might reveal a person's. I think that's why people go on dates, you know. People have their first date in the River Cafe or in a restaurant. So I think it does reveal the kind of person you are. You know, the famous story I always tell is the person who called up and said that he wanted a cake for that evening, saying, "Will you marry me?" And because he was going to propose to his girlfriend, and he wanted it on the cake. And he came in, we made a beautiful chocolate nemesis, and we wrote in beautiful handwriting around the circumference, "Will you marry me?" And we gave them a great table. And he came in and he sat down. He came to the, you know, to the manager at the sort of, I think after the first course, and said, "Cancel the cake, you know,
Wow.
cancel the." So what happened? You know, we never knew what happened in that 10 minutes of 20 minutes, 30 minutes. Did she tell him something? Did he tell her something? Or did he just change his mind? So dramas, these take place in a room, and I find it interesting.
It's almost like encyclopedic. I decided to take a look back and see what was going on in the world, and you're not prepared for this, but what was going on in the world roughly around the time that you started the restaurant. These are approximates, right? But Margaret Thatcher had a couple of years left as prime minister. The Berlin Wall was about to fall. Communism was collapsing in Czechoslovakia, Romania, Poland. Your friend Tim Berners-Lee was inventing the internet. George Bush was being sworn in as president.
Wow.
De Klerk and Mandela had their first meeting in a prison in South Africa.
George Bush Sr.
Senior.
Was that 1990?
Just before.
Okay.
Nintendo released the world's first Game Boy.
Yeah.
The Simpsons made its debut. The first handheld phone call was made.
Wow.
And then you look at the arc of history, and you look at all the people who've come through your restaurant, thousands and thousands, hundreds of thousands of people, many of whom who've made history and been evident, Tim being an example. And you've been a witness to all of this. Did you ever think about writing a book about yourself?
Well, I am thinking about it now. I thought when we did the first cookbooks, and the first book came out in 1994, and I remember Ed Victor, who was our agent, said, "Ruthie, we were a tiny restaurant there," and he said, "Why don't you do a cookbook?" And Rose and I said, "Oh, we're cooks and chefs, we're not authors." But then we understood that we were doing something that we wanted to communicate. And actually, it started out by communicating to the chefs, where was that recipe for, the Papa Pomodoro? Where was the recipe for the lemon tart? So we did that book. And then we realized, I think, through the years that we loved doing books. We loved communicating. We liked talking to the people who were eating in the restaurant, going home. And that developed into more and more and more books. With each book, we learned more about each other and more about what we wanted to say. And then my own story, maybe that's a book to be written that we're thinking about. But mostly, as you say, it's just a way of communicating. We had a fire in 2008 and in April, and we closed for 6 months. And we opened October 12th, I think, in 2008, the day that Lehman Brothers
went down.
And so you just think, what a time,
I remember it really well, and I know exactly where I was. And this fire is an interesting topic. When I was 7 years old, our family home burned to the ground when I was 7. And it has scarred me for life, and still to this day. I think about it. There isn't a week that passes when I don't think about it. And trying to recover your life from the ashes, as it were. You did that during the great financial crisis.
Yeah.
And to reopen the restaurant, having seen it burn to the ground, and reopen it on possibly the most historically relevant, scary moment in the history of
with the debt of, it cost us
a lot of
£2 million in those days.
A lot of money.
Yeah.
What was that like?
We've never had an investor in the restaurant, except for Richard, and and that was ours. We borrowed from the bank. And I think I talked to Charles Dunstan, who's a great friend and started, Carphone Warehouse. I said, "Charles, how am I going to repay this debt? Is anybody going to come? What are we going to do?" And he kind of really, "You just hold on, Ruthie Rogers, and, don't borrow 1 penny and don't get an investor, and this will be paid back and you'll see." And luckily he was right, because a lot of people didn't survive. We just tried to make, I think that in every crisis I've had, when Rose died, the response was, well, we're just going to make this the best restaurant you can make it and invest in ourselves and work really hard and try to make the food so good that people want to eat it. And nothing measured the death of Rose. Nothing. And then there was the COVID. How do you stay
Course.
closed for 7 months and open again, then close again, and no vision of how long this is going to take? How long do we
Keep
keep
everybody
this?
employed.
And we kept everyone employed. Yeah, we did.
Americans are obsessed with British culture, you know that,
Mm.
right? And I guess it's the same in the other direction. We watch each other's TV shows and we listen to each other's music and so forth. But most Americans, I think, are positive Anglophiles in terms of watching British society and British culture. And obviously obsessed with table manners and the proper way to do things and etiquette, I think, was invented here.
Mm.
So over the last 40 years, as you observe, you've told me before you've only ever had to ban one person
Yeah.
ever
Because he was rude to a waiter.
because he was rude to a waiter, which is amazing and says everything about you. As you observed people
Mm.
and how they behave in restaurants, and with the advent of social media and personalized consumption of content and so forth, what have you observed? Is it better? Is it worse? Is it different? Are people still adhering to the old social norms?
Well, one of the things that gives me great joy is the number of children that come to the restaurant, that families eat out together, and how great these little kids are. I love them. And whether they get up too many times or they, make a noise, doesn't worry me at all. They're trying the food. They're sitting there at the table. Very, very few of them come with their iPads. And if they do, I don't care, because if the parents want to have a quiet lunch and the kid can, watch a TV show, why not? Not my job to say no. So I don't judge that at all. But I do really get great pleasure from seeing families eating here. And that for my family, it was you went to a restaurant for a special occasion, someone's birthday, to celebrate something, or a holiday. It was a real big deal. And, people can come here, have a pasta and a Coke, as far as I'm concerned. It doesn't matter. So that really gives me great joy to see children in the restaurant. And I think people are, certainly when we opened the restaurant in 1987, there was a kind of, what is this food? Because I think a lot of Italian restaurants were opened by waiters who did great job, but brought a certain kind of Italian food. And Rose and I really wanted to bring the kind of food that we'd eaten ourselves in Tuscany or, other areas of Italy. So I think the curiosity of people has changed, that people are like, what is this bread and tomato soup with basil and I have to pay money for it? To, wow, I went to Italy, and had Papa Pomodoro, and now you have it. And that access to travel, we can thank Freddie Laker for that you could spend £8, and go to Istanbul, and then come back and be interested. I think immigrants are fantastic for a country because they bring the food of other countries. So I don't know if I'm answering your question, but I've never had, or rarely had to think, oh, I don't like that person sitting at table 10 because they're being this or that. We're really lucky. I've been with other restaurateurs who talk about their difficult customers. I'd like to think that we nip it in the bud. If somebody doesn't like their table, we'll move it. If somebody wants a different kind of dressing on a salad, we'll make it differently. I mean, there are things we won't do. But I think if you know that people are generally good, generally kind, etiquette, it means, being kind, really.
I know that obviously having been married to Richard and the extraordinary career that he had and all the legacy he left to the world, art at the center of your life is so important. And you love art and you love looking at beautiful things. You've got some amazing pieces of art around the restaurant. And this concept of really understanding the beauty in things, the books that you've produced, making beautiful things be appreciated for what they are is really core to who you are.
Yeah.
Talk about that.
Well, I think my father, though he was a doctor and was restricted in his wealth or what he could buy, for him, art. My mother was much more literary, but my father used to go take a trip to New York probably once a week. It took 2 hours, and he he would really try and go, and he'd go to all the galleries, he'd see the art, and sometimes he'd come back with just open the boot of the car and take something out, and I
Wow.
think that he did it with, this amazing Japanese, furniture maker called Nakashima, which now is off the charts, but I remember him going to New Hope, Pennsylvania, and bringing a chair back, and so I think we grew up with a kind of real values of art and artists, and we moved to Woodstock. A lot of his great friend was Philip Guston, and there were other artists there, but also music, and so I think we were brought up in a house of not serious culture, but an appreciation. My sister's a painter, and so I think and then of course for me the revelation was Richard because suddenly I was in the world of architecture and I was in the world of Florence and looking at, both buildings by Brunelleschi or going up and seeing the Tintorettos. Or I was really interested in the art culture of New York, what Leo Castelli did with artists, what Andy Warhol, bridging, interview magazine and films and art. And so, yeah, I think it's always been something in our world that we have that we like. And when you come to our house, you'll see, of course, being married to a contemporary architect, there's not a lot of walls. And so that's always restricted us. Not that we wanted to have a collection, we just have the art. Really, three artists at home. We have Philip Guston and we have Cy Twombly. We're both friends, and then we have some Warhols.
Well, if you're going to pick three, there are three pretty
They're
good
pretty
ones.
good, and they live very happily together. And I still get a thrill when I walk up the steps and I see the Twombleys. It's kind of welcome home, Ruthie. You're safe.
Almost 40 years. What a life you've lived and are still living, which is the great thing. You have such a zest and enthusiasm for life. Did you ever imagine that this would ever happen to you? Do you ever think about your life? I often ask this question of people who've been extraordinarily successful in business, that made billions of dollars, and they sit back. When you look out the window, do you sit there and think, oh my God, I've done it? Or take 5 minutes to look out in the river and reflect on what you've done? Or are you too busy doing?
It's a reflection. Of course, I think, when I was at the party for Mayor Bloomberg gave the other day, and he said, wonderful things. And then I spoke. I started to cry actually because just got a bit choked up. The idea that my grandparents, it's a cliche, that my grandparents came with nothing, and here I am, being given a party by the mayor of New York. How did this happen? I think I do think much more about how am I going to get through the day, and I often think that if I was going to write a book, I would say, because quite often I think about it, people come up to me and say, "Oh, this is so amazing. This is so incredible. This is how do you do it? You're such a success." And I would call my book "If Only They Knew," because I do think everyone does have a story, and behind that, so I live in self-doubt. I live with concerns for my children. I am, obsessed with the unfairness of life and how lucky I am. So I think a lot of my thought, if I think, wow, look at all this, it doesn't feel self-congratulatory, but really how lucky I've been.
So, Ruthie, we're here in the River Cafe. This is
Yeah.
what we call the Uncharted Walk. It's just an opportunity to ask you questions that you don't know about, but they're just very rapid fire, and you have to tell me
Okay.
what you think.
Okay.
Biggest influence in your life, in your career, and everything you've done.
Richard Rogers.
Okay. If you were to have dinner with one person, living or dead, if you could choose one person, who would it be?
Nelson Mandela.
Why?
Because to me, he was a hero. He changed history. He was committed. His values, and so I'd like to learn more about him.
What's one thing about you that most people wouldn't know, but that would surprise them?
Oh, well, I try and have a bar of chocolate every night before I go to sleep.
Really?
Yeah, I love chocolate
Why do you try to have them before you go to sleep?
because I try to be
Decompress?
undisciplined enough to have it because I know I shouldn't. But very often I buy one on my way home from work and I share it with the taxi cab driver.
I love
I
that.
love chocolate at night.
Best piece of advice you were ever given?
Give a big party in a small space.
One piece of advice you were given and are really glad you ignored?
Don't adopt a baby because our youngest son was adopted, and lots of people love to tell me you shouldn't do this.
Most flexible food item in the world. If you're to pick one item in the kitchen that you could work with above all others,
Olive oil, extra virgin olive oil.
legacy, what would you like it to be?
I suppose that my children knew they were loved.
I love it. Thank you so much for everything. You're the best. Thank you.